Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on Trends in Leading People, Unveiling Global Leadership Survey Results and an Updated BG-CMM. Thank you for investing this time with us and with our industry leaders. I am Mallory Price and will monitor today's session. As a reminder for APMP members, this webinar applies toward your continuing education units for certification. As with all Shipley webinars, this presentation will also be uploaded to our website by tomorrow. Today, we have three experts joining us. Amy McGeady is the Senior Vice President of Strategic Services for Shipley. Amy started her leadership journey as President of the Junior Honor Society in 8th grade. Since then, she has been a proposal manager and writer, a proposal center director in a Fortune 100 company, a small business owner, nonprofit CEO, executive leader, and board member. She has the good fortune to learn from some awesome leaders along the way. Paul Dayton is the Strategic Services Director at Shipley, UK, and the Executive Director of Business Winning Institute for Shipley, US. He has over 30 years of experience in engineering, program management, change management, and business growth. He is the author of the latest capability maturity model for business growth, and his advisory practice helps client organizations to transform how they win good business. Jack Sullivan is a director and senior consultant at Shipley Asia Pacific with over 15 years of business development experience. He works with clients across a range of sectors to lead process improvement projects and support major business winning efforts. He has trained hundreds of professionals in proposal writing, proposal management, strategy, and capture planning. Having commenced his professional career as a consultant project manager, Jack reviewed hundreds of proposals and was involved in many evaluation processes. This has provided him with a rare combination of perspectives that allows him to guide his clients through complex decision-making environments. Jack has 3 daughters under 8 years of age and a German short-haired pointer. He likes to sleep in his spare time. So thank you all three of you for joining us and for taking your time to spend with us. So we wanted to tell you a little bit about Shipley before we get started. Shipley is a global professional services firm. Business development training and certification is one of the things that we focus on, and this is part of that. We offer proposal management, writing, and response management services, end-to-end proposal support and consulting, capture sales and pursuit management consulting, and many more things. So thank you all for being here once again. And Amy, I am going to pass controls over to you.
Thank you, Mallory. Appreciate your introduction. So we are really excited to share the latest results of the Shipley Global Research Project from 2023 and 2024. One of the things that Shipley is known for is our passion and our care for our customers. So it's really important for Shipley to understand the most effective business growth practices and what is going on with the customers in our industry. As we all know, the workplace has changed quite a bit over the past 4 years. So we designed this project to look specifically at people practices, and we gathered information from global leaders of business development teams about the practices that best support effective recruitment and retention and help grow their staff to their full potential. So our study built on the works of Frederick Hertzberg and Daniel Pink to really understand what motivates and drives business development professionals at work. And we focused on 3 areas: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And all of this information will inform the next update of our capability and maturity model for business growth. So we want to thank all of you who gave us information and responded to our surveys. We really appreciate your insights. So for people who are familiar with our capability maturity model for business development, you'll see that we are updating that this year to become our capability maturity model for business growth. Because we know our customers, and probably all of you, are most focused on how to grow your businesses. And we want to share the latest practices that we know. So we'll be updating the people theme with the insights we gained during this study, and are excited to share that with you today. So Jack, I'll turn this over to you to tell us a little bit about who responded.
Thanks, Amy. We got a really broad range of responses from all over the globe where Shipley has its presence. We were hoping to get at least 30. At 30, we get some strong statistical relevance and allows us to compare across regions, across sectors and various other things. We got 44 in the end, so we got well above what we wanted and needed. We got actually a really good response in my area of the world in Australia and New Zealand, and I think from my local perspective anyway with the clients, those who we reached out to are really interested to hear feedback from this survey. So the uptake was quite high here, and I hope what we've presented today is going to fulfill expectations.
Thank you, Jack. Oops. Oh, sorry, one technical difficulty. Oh, there we go. Paul, do you want to tell us a little bit about the profile of the people who responded?
Sure, thanks, Amy. Well, let me start by saying again how grateful we are for those clients who responded across the globe, took the time to participate in this project. We really do appreciate it. So looking at your profile, although smaller organizations were represented, more than 3/4 had annual revenues of more than $100 million or equivalent. 4 out of 10 were in North America, and with a third in Asia Pacific. The remainder were in the UK, Europe and MENA, or were operating globally. Just under half employed more than 10,000 staff, although we had good representation down to a few hundreds of staff. And contributors were usually operating in both government and commercial markets, selling both products and services. Finally, the people completing the survey were primarily in executive leadership roles. And again, thank you for your responses. So let's dip into the data for the first time and look at the challenge or the challenges that industry is facing when trying to recruit, retain and develop business growth staff. While 75% of organizations believe their business growth staff are reaching their career potential, that means that 1 in 4 are not, and that's a lot of people. Just over half said they had minimal retention issues, whilst a third said they had minimal recruitment issues. So no surprises perhaps, but we can confirm better to hold on to good staff than try to replace them. And organizations then went on to say how tough it is to find the right mix of qualities when recruiting into business growth roles, that people coming into those roles tend to be replacing more experienced people, and that when they do join, they are perhaps more likely to move on in order to develop and further their careers than were their predecessors. We also saw that successful capture managers particularly were likely to be approached by other hiring organizations as so-called hired guns. So let's stay with some of the core data. What we have here is simply a ranking of the most commonly deployed people practices across the 44 participants. We will return to some of these shortly from a leadership perspective, but for now we can say that in the workplace of 2024, giving people autonomy in how they manage their time and schedule and where they work from the office or from home, is now an absolute given. Any organization that doesn't offer that is going to be swimming against the tide.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Paul, when you shared these findings with me originally, that a lot of the data we collected specifically from leaders of business development teams are really consistent with global trends in the workforce. You know, that people globally are saying that they want more flexible work arrangements, competitive compensation, opportunities for growth, and that, you know, people aren't just showing up for a paycheck. People are looking for meaning, that they want to know that the role that they play matters and it is having a larger impact than maybe just their narrow focus day to day. So I think it's interesting that our findings related to business development seem like they're tracking with larger trends in the global workforce.
Yeah, that's certainly true. I mean, certainly came through in the data.
So, Paul, do you want to share a little bit more about this, about the data itself?
Sure. So having analyzed all of the data, and again, thank you for those who took the time to share their practices with us. Let's now look at those leadership practices that you told us are having the most positive impact when recruiting, retaining, and developing business growth staff. What we've highlighted there is when recruiting, our conclusion is that you should highlight that the candidate's achievements will be recognised, of course, but also that they will indeed have the opportunity to grow beyond the role you're hiring them for, to give them that future career trajectory. And if you want to keep them, our findings showed that the practices that had the most impact on retaining staff were to giving staff control over their schedule and working environment, but always at the same time being clear about what you expect of them. And finally, if you want to achieve all three, or rather if you want to develop people, I'll come on to all three in a moment. If you want to develop people to reach their full potential, then let them truly become experts in their field. And Jack will tell us a little bit more about that shortly. And to achieve all three, our findings showed that if you do just one thing, then give people the authority to prioritize their work and make their own decisions along the way. And that will allow them to be recruited with those promises, to be retained with those practices, and to be developed to their full potential through their career when they're with your organization.
So we've picked out 4 leadership focus areas from the data, and our hope today is not just to share our findings, but also to offer some practical strategies that can support your efforts to recruit, to retain, and grow your business development teams. So the 4 areas that we've picked out, Paul and Jack and I will talk through, some of the common challenges and some strategies that you can use to overcome them. So, the first kind of topic area that we want to talk about is giving people the authority to prioritize their task and make decisions. And we're starting with that because, as Paul mentioned, that really affects all aspects of being able to, bring the right people onto your team, keep them on your team, and then grow them. And then, the second area is talking about how to provide opportunities to develop expert skills. Another area is encouraging that sense of belonging and teamwork at work. And then finally, creating environments where people, can safely learn from their mistakes, which can be a bit of a challenge when you're talking about high stakes work that we all do in business development. So we'll start by talking about, giving people the authority to prioritize work and make decisions. So Paul, I'll turn that over to you to share some thoughts there.
Thanks, Amy. And just to pick up the discussion from a few moments ago on giving people that authority, the challenge here is moving perhaps from a leadership as a supervisory role to one that provides environments for people to thrive. So from supervisor to facilitator, if you will. In a business growth context, this might involve carefully explaining your business growth strategy so it may be successfully translated into operational day-to-day priorities and decision making. But let's also make it clear to others that you have delegated your authority to that individual, and to that person we suggest you tell them that your door remains open. They're going to be challenged by decisions they haven't had to make before, and they should have a route through to escalate issues as required, whilst giving them the opportunity to make their own decisions and grow in that capacity.
Paul, when you were putting this together, these strategies in some ways, can seem pretty straightforward, but what I think is really interesting is just remembering to be intentional as leaders. As a leader of a team, we might understand what the business strategy is. We're in meetings about that all day, every day, but sometimes we forget to share that with the people that we work with, so that, they can understand this is how your work fits in. This is why we're prioritizing this. I think, also being really clear, we can sometimes take for granted that people, might know that they can come to us when they have an issue, but sometimes when you're in not the supervisory role, that you need more clarity of like, well, what issues can I just resolve myself? And what are the issues I need to kind of take up the chain to resolve?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, Amy. I think it's all about clarity. I mean, we see many clients who have a very well-defined business strategy, but nobody knows it.
Right,
So when they have
right.
to make decisions, maybe in a gate or a maturity gate review, then they're looking at a checklist and they've got no real connection between where the business is really going and the decision they have to make on that day. So being really clear on that strategy, and then also being really clear on the delegations and escalation paths. Absolutely
Yeah,
right.
I think that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. Well, can you tell us a little bit more about providing the opportunity to develop expert skills? I think, Jack, you're going to share some insights here with us.
Yeah. Yeah, and look, your last point segues really interestingly into this topic, and to the second dot point, which I'll jump to because it kind of continues on from where you left off there, which is a lot of the time when training is procured by our clients, there's a lack of understanding as to where it fits within the broader strategy for the business. And when the leaders within the organisation don't understand why they would send their staff along to these training sessions, it becomes very difficult for them to justify the time that they have to spend away from their day job to go through this capability uplift process. So really defining the competencies that are required of staff and reviewing those regularly and making sure everybody understands why people need these skills, how it helps achieve the broader corporate strategy, how it helps attract new customers or grow existing customers is really important. In order to free up the time, and this first dot point really comes to the key challenge that I would say 9 out of 10 of our customers have in our region anyway around adopting training programs, is how do we provide our people with enough time in their calendar to be able to step out of the office and into a training room for a while. And as much as this can be a bit of a vicious cycle, the real key first step, if you can get it right, is just being better at saying no to the unwinnable opportunities. I think intuitively a lot of clients know which opportunities they are. There's often pressure internally to go after them anyway. That first real breakthrough step in building maturity in organisations is admitting you can't win something, not pursuing it, and using that time to develop the skills of your people and improve the systems of your business. So that is the key challenge that we often help clients try and get around. The third step, which is a luxury if you can afford it, if you've got a large enough work group that you can build flexibility around your training program and have lots of options, is to set multiple locations for regions like Asia Pacific where we cover large distances, but also potentially have online and face-to-face options available and multiple dates available so people can take training in a time that suits them. So it is a big issue, taking time out of the day job to undertake training or any sort of professional development is, like I said, probably 9 out of 10 clients stated as their key concern. But there are ways to deal with it.
Well, Jack, I think all of these are so important. As Paul kind of kicked us off with, the data indicates that when people are hiring in our field, they tend to be hiring younger professionals to replace more tenured professionals. And when you're hiring people that haven't done certain jobs before or are on a growth trajectory, it's so important to understand that they're going to have to develop that deep expertise that maybe their predecessor who was in the role for a decade or longer may have developed. And just to remember, you've hired good people. It's time to invest in growing them so that they can have the expertise that you need them to have to be successful in your organization.
Yeah, for sure. And the other big challenge I think that we've all experienced in proposals and business development more broadly is that nobody finishes high school and goes off to do a bachelor's of proposal writing or go on to do a master's of business development. It's such an obscure industry and people kind of fall into these roles. And unfortunately, we find a lot of people coming along to our workshops who have suffered many years, sometimes decades of school of hard knock style learning. So I think a recognition of the fact that this is not a skill set that many people are going to come to their role ready equipped with. So training is probably more of a priority within this space than it is just about any other.
I think that's such an excellent point. I'm glad you shared that. You know, we all spend so much time in our jobs, but I think really the data is showing it's not really just our time, that people are really invested in their work. And because of that, you know, they want to have this sense of belonging and a sense of teamwork. You know, and as Paul mentioned, we've landed at a place where hybrid work, you know, is here to stay. So, you know, at this point in time, whether teams are going to be working, you know, virtually or in some combination of virtually or in person, you know, it's unlikely that most workplaces will have everyone back in the same place. So, you know, the continual flexibility of working from home, you know, it has a lot of perks. It can be less time commuting. People can have more flexibility to walk their dog during the day or pick up their kids from school. But there is a downside to that too, that, you know, there's a downside in terms of those kind of casual professional friendships that you can develop when you're all working in an office together. And really some of the accidental career development that happens, you know, you're in a meeting or you bump into the hall and you see someone who sees the potential in you and might start kind of looking out for career opportunities and development for you within your company. So as leaders, it's really important that we aren't really focused on what people call kind of that forced fun. I think when people talk about belonging and teamwork, it's easy to jump right to, oh, let's have some more team happy hours, or, you know, invite people in for dinners. And that's not necessarily what people are looking for when they want to feel like they belong or they're part of a team. I think it's really important that as leaders, if you want to cultivate teamwork, you really need to clarify expectations. And with people working virtually or in hybrid teams, you know, you want to minimize as much uncertainty as you can, because when we all worked in the office, the work weeks seemed to have more of a sense of structure. So when people are working virtually, you want to be able to help them create those routines. Also, people are struggling to understand how are they going to advance in their careers now that they're working at home, or if you work in a hybrid environment, maybe they don't see you every time they're in the office. So they start feeling like they need more time to have connection with you as their leader, that they want to share what's going on with their work. I know I myself have been guilty of this, of having high performers on my team who work virtually and just thinking that, well, they're great. They probably like it that I'm not bothering them all the time. But when I talk to them, they want to share with me what's going on with their work. They want me to listen to them. They want my feedback. And there is a lot of research going on beyond our world of business development that's saying, you know, when people work virtually, managers give them less feedback. That people crave that feedback to know, am I doing the right things? What could I be doing better? So I think some of these things around belonging and teamwork are kind of more serious in a business sense than just having some fun together. And then Jack, I think you were going to talk a little bit more about, you know, helping people learn in safe environments.
Yeah, and feedback again is a really good segue to come over to this slide with, and I'll work from the bottom up, given we've sort of led off with that topic. But White Hat as a phase 6 activity, we often see so poorly implemented. It often comprises of the filing of an email received from the client, providing excuses why our client wasn't chosen. So it doesn't provide constructive feedback for staff. There's not an environment to share where they felt things went well and where things didn't go well. So just on the topic of White Hat, what good White Hat often looks like and is usually quite short of is an introspective look at our business behaviours and functions and systems. It's not whether we won or lost or what the client said. It's how well did we move through the various stages of the BD life cycle. How well did we hand off from one role to another? How well did we brief internally? How well did we do all these things? Because what Paul will be able to confirm through the data that has been collected for decades now around this is that organisations who get the fundamentals right and behave in a cohesive and mature fashion get better win rates and capture ratios. That's the beneficial outcome they achieve. So get your stuff right at home, and stuff gets, and your win rate and capture ratio and profitability and all these things that we strive for will improve. And really fundamentally, this idea of being able to make mistakes comes back to the notion that you hear around sporting clubs all the time, which is that, what do you want? Do you want a team of champions or a champion team? And the football clubs, the professional sporting clubs around the world, the ones that are most successful are the ones who have a champion team. If you read the level 1 maturity model caption, it talks about individual heroics. When you have individual heroics, it tends to be the case that either somebody is praised too much for the success, or they are blamed too much for the failure. When we get our businesses into a better state of maturity within our business growth, business development function, there's less reliance on individuals, and people can learn and make mistakes along the way, and it really has very limited impact in the overall pursuit. So until you can get yourself out of that phase 1, even phase 2 of business development, business growth, maturity, it's going to be challenging to provide people with that space. But really, once we start being more mature in how we manage our people and our systems, we can take that burden off the individuals. Training and coaching obviously falls into this category as well. When people are well trained, when people have mentors, when people can learn from those who have made the sorts of mistakes they're likely to make before, and can help them avoid the basic errors that I think a lot of us have gone through, then we can help people avoid the mistake in the first place. So to sort of summarize that as briefly as I can, be better at looking at your organization and providing constructive criticism, and providing pathways for improvement in the future. Avoid blame, and focus on creating a cohesive team that allows everybody to contribute, but no one individual to ultimately be responsible for an entire pursuit.
Thank you for that. I suspect all of us on this call, I know the three of us have talked about it. For myself, I know some of the greatest learning I've had in my career is when I've had the space to mess things up and kind of learn myself the hard way. Oops, that was not the best way to do something. You pick yourself back up, and then you don't make that same mistake again. And I think that can be some of the best learning that we have, basically in life, but definitely at work as well. So Paul, do you want to walk us through the kind of overall conclusions of the study?
Sure, thanks, Amy. So let's go back to those 3 headings that you mentioned at the beginning, Amy. Start with autonomy, and what has this study told us, and what have we been hearing from Jack and yourself about how to interpret that? Well, clearly, as I mentioned at the beginning, flexible working hours, remote working are an absolute given now. It's going to be tough to recruit anybody if you can't offer that, and there are certain environments when remote working isn't possible, but wherever possible, both for recruitment and retention, then that is really, really important. And as I mentioned earlier, and Jack expanded upon that, being able to communicate those business priorities from the sort of boardroom down into the operations area of a team. And, here's what it means to you, what our strategy is. Therefore, these are our priorities. Therefore, I can now delegate this to you because you understand what we're trying to achieve here. That's really important to give people the autonomy to make good decisions. If we turn to mastery, Jack's spoken a moment ago about the importance of training and coaching, and what we, I guess, always knew, but just being reminded of, is that making mistakes in a business growth area is actually quite difficult to recover from. Making a wrong teaming decision, making a wrong call on a strategy can cost an organization tens of millions of dollars. So the importance of being able to go to that safe space, that safe environment, provide people with the safety to learn by mistakes. We generally learn more from our mistakes than our successes. So let's give people that environment where they can they can mess up and have a good laugh about it and not it cripple the business. And the other part of that is to keep looking for that untapped talent. So not just the people who are doing their job well now, but what else could they be doing? What else could they move on to be really, become masters of their domain? Going to purpose, this cuts to people seeing how important their work is, not just to your organization, but to your customers, to see why they're doing it, because people like meaningful work, and business growth is no different to any other profession. It's about having a purpose that isn't just about, so I move on to my final point here, financial motivators. We didn't know what the survey was going to tell us, but what you told us is that financial incentives are now, in 2024, are not really a big lever that you're using as a motivator to increase performance. But at the same time, people need to feel they are compensated fairly. So those are our overall conclusions. Amy?
Okay, great. I think, I hope that everyone finds this really helpful. We did get a few questions. I know we're trying to keep the webinar to under 40 minutes, but I think we got a few questions that are worth us continuing to talk about. One of the questions that we got repeatedly was, can you tell me about, were there any regional variations? And we got that question up that we did go ahead and put together a slide on this. So, if we look across regions on these topics, you can see in general, as Paul has mentioned, people felt the most optimistic about people being able to achieve their own potential, and had the biggest struggle around recruitment. And so while these regional variations, they're not statistically significant, because even though we're happy to have had 44 survey respondents, that's not a significant group statistically. So some of the findings we have are a little more anecdotal. But if you look at this, leaders in the UK, Europe, Australia seemed, leaders in the UK and Europe were among the most optimistic in terms of all of these indicators, except on the issue of recruitment, where Australian leaders shared the most positive outlook. Leaders across all categories in the US responded the least favorably. And there could be a lot of things that explain this, that there are variations in culture, in economic conditions, in labor market dynamics, corporate practices, legislation, and policy that could be explaining some of these differences that we see around the world. I thought it was really interesting that in the UK and Europe, 100% of the leaders that we survey responded positively that their team have the opportunity to achieve their full potential. That 3/4 of those leaders had very few issues with retention. Now, they still showed some challenges with recruitment, and more than 3/4 of the Australian leaders who responded said their teams have the opportunity to reach their full potential, and just over half said that they have minimal issues retaining staff. And as I mentioned before, the Australians and the folks in New Zealand seem to have the least challenges with recruiting business winning staff. So it's kind of interesting. There was some variability here. Some we all might expect, and some, unexpected. So I just think that some of those findings, while not statistically significant, are interesting. Jack, one of the other questions that we got that I thought I would ask you is, people are asking, okay, so if I understand that these are the things I should be focused on, what do I do first? Where do I get started?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it kind of depends a little bit on where you are on the maturity model to start with. If you're a low maturity organisation, and a lot of organisations are at that sort of level 2, sometimes even lower at level 1. I think there's 2 key things you can do when you're down at level 1 and level 2. The first one is training. Training is just so important on so many levels. The unintended benefit often is some team building that you get from it, but really what you're getting from it is a common understanding of roles, responsibilities, what a good process looks like. And once everybody kind of understands what good looks like, it becomes a lot easier to build from that foundation. To get there, though, there's sometimes a first step that a lot of organisations need to take, which is to give yourself some free time, and that requires actually quite a challenging maturity step, which is to stop bidding on stuff you can't win. It often feels like a loss when you could have potentially had a win, but when you're honest with yourself, sometimes you can look at your pipeline and just go, yeah, I'm not quite sure why that's in there. We really don't have a chance. We don't know the client. They're not talking to us about this job. There's an incumbent they quite like. All these sorts of triggers on your go, no go sheets will tell you that it's probably best you sit this one out and spend some time building that capability. If you do have that already, though, I will just talk a little bit about if you are a solid level 2 or nudging level 3, data has got to be, your key driver for basically everything, making sure that you're collecting data on your win rates, your capture ratios, your profitability. You've got a quantitative approach to bid no bid processes, so you can go back and look at, where did you say yes but you didn't win, and where were you successful, and how easily did you get through the gates. The data really drives maturity once you've got that foundational level. So they would be my sort of go-to first pieces of advice. There's obviously lots of other things we can do, but everybody can benefit from all 3 of those things. So it's a pretty safe first step for just about anybody.
Yeah, and I think having that data also starts connecting the dots between what are your company's priorities, what are you trying to achieve, and then how do individual roles on your team contribute to that? Who's doing well, who needs a little more help. So I think that's right. And go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it provides confidence in decision making.
Yeah.
A lot of the time when you don't have that data, you're waiting for leaders to show you the way, and they're often working off their own gut instinct, which is possibly worse than your gut instinct because they're not as close to the coalface as you. So depending on where you are in the organisation, the data becomes such an easy way to make good decisions. And a lot of the time, as I mentioned before, the no bid decisions become extremely difficult because what have we got to lose? Let's just bid on it. But when you've got good data, the data can say, well, you're not going to win it. Here's how much you're going to spend on the pursuit. Here's how much resource you're going to take away from winnable opportunities. The data then makes it much, much, much easier to say, no, this one's not for us.
Yeah, such a good point. And then Paul, as the study's lead author, I would just like to know from you, what was the most surprising thing you found in the data?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. I've thought about this, and I think it was obvious when we thought about it, but the data just sort of screamed it, just how difficult it is to make mistakes in a business growth, business winning environment. If we're in any other walk of business, any other walk of life within an organization, we can mess up and we can usually recover that. We can go do it again, we can make it again, we can redo something. But if you make a bad call at the front end, and you've lost that $500 million opportunity, that's a bit of a career limiter, really. And it was always obvious, but it just sort of jumped out, and it just really underpinned to what Jack was describing earlier, the importance of creating that safe space for training away from the live opportunity, and then on the live opportunity, having that coaching expertise at hand, just to provide the extra guidance, the extra reassurance, and making sure that people don't really foul up when it really matters. So that's not a surprise, really, when we think about it, but it really jumped out from the data, Amy.
Okay, well, that's great. Well, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much to everyone who responded to this survey. Even though we've tried to do our best to simplify the results, there were many, many data points that I know Paul took the lead on, culling through to make sure that we really had a good understanding of how people leadership practices have changed over the last few years. And as I said in the beginning, we'll be using these inputs to update our business growth capability maturity model to share with industry. So we appreciate all of your time and thank you for being with us today.